Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sins of Time podcast. I'm your host, Tarek Ibrahim, and I am with the incredible Mujir Muneeruddin, the other co-host to this incredible show where we talk about history potentially of the world, history of the things that you actually care about the most. And what we try and do more often than not is try and tell you the stories that you thought you knew, turns out you didn't know. So today we have a very important episode. I think Mujir has been working on this for some time now because we were having a sidebar conversation as it would be. And Mujir's like, hey, Tarek, like, what do you think about this? And I just went into this like complete psychotic behavior in which I'm like, Mujir, we should talk about this. And he's like, really? You think that's something? I'm like, oh, Mujir, this is one of the best subjects you could talk about. And then Mujir went into it and he found out, yeah, we got some gold here. And Mujir already knew, but he actually had to just put it together for us in a quote unquote, what will be a short episode to you, but really is a long episode for everyone to watch today. So I think we're super excited, Mujir. I know I'm excited. What are you excited? Are you ready for this?
Absolutely, because this is one of those topics that is very unheralded in Islamic history. People always talk about the original period, the vintage era of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, and the Umayyads get a lot of love because Islamic civilization was being founded and formed and framed at that time. And then they fast forward to the Ottomans because that bleeds into the modern era. There's this entire middle era of modern Islamic history post-Risala that is often forgotten. And maybe it's selective memory. Maybe we don't want to think about the 13th century and how we just got absolutely decimated by the Mongolian hordes that came. But being all that as it may, we thought it was very important for us to understand what happened in that century. And to really contextualize it for all of our friends watching at home, imagine a world in which you're the average Muslim living in Palestine or Syria or Egypt, which is the heartland of the Muslim world at the time and continues to be to today as well. You've got the Crusaders barreling in from the northwest, and they're far more formidable. They've got King Louis IX, who's one of the more renowned kings of the medieval period for Europe, coming from France. You've got this unstoppable object coming in from the northeast, which is the Mongols. One battle after the other, for the better part of the 13th century, we have no answer for them. They've destroyed our far brethren in Khorasan, in Samarkand, in Central Asia. The Khwarizm Empire just got wiped off the face of the earth. And then at one point, the great Abbasid Empire is decimated and brought to its feet, and every single person in the city of wisdom, Baghdad, and all the books in the great library, accounting for maybe something like 70-80% of the world's books, wiped off the face of the earth in one fell swoop. We have no answer for these guys, and nobody has an answer for them. They would go into Europe and walk over them like grass. But the difference with us versus the Europeans is the Mongols didn't quite have the same issue with the Europeans that they had with us. When they came into our lands, they knocked out the Khwarizm Empire, and they thought, what's the next big fat Muslim that we can target? The Abbasids, let's go take them out. When they gobbled us up, what's the next big center of power? It's in Egypt. This is not a good century for Islam because by some metrics, we might have the world lost a chunk of its population, 35%, maybe by some accounts. That number might have been even higher among the Muslims, and certainly among the number of people that you can field as combatants in war was wiped off the face of the earth. In that context, where we have nothing more we can do, and they're coming for the one last Muslim stronghold in Cairo and Syria and Palestine, the Muslim world turns to a bunch of slaves. That is the story of the Mamluk dynasty that we want to cover today.
And I think it's such an important topic for so many reasons, right? First of all, we're talking like, did you hear what Mujir said? It's a dynasty, it's a kingdom of slaves. Like I think that by itself can be discussed forever because it's just so unheard of. Probably people watching right now that have never heard of this before. What does it mean to have a kingdom of slaves? Like, what do you actually?
And it's a unique confluence of so many different factors that created a unthinkable outcome. You had the combination of the Sharia, the Islamic law rulings on slavery and indentured servitude, if you will. You had the zeitgeist of the 13th century where Islam was facing an existential threat. So at that point, the Ummah had to be a little less selective than maybe they would have been under the Abbasis. And then you also had a situation where there's this entire history of indentured servitude or slavery in Islamic history, creating enough of a sample size where by the 12th and the 13th century, Muslims are good enough at figuring out what works and what doesn't, such that they're able to craft an empire that is led by slaves. And so to really understand what created this proverbial monster that is the slave dynasty of the Mamluks, you really have to go back into history and understand where they came from. So the Mamluks actually started in, generally speaking, the middle of the 9th century under a very well-known Caliph of the Abbasi Empire. His name is Mu'tasim. So Mu'tasim is well fabled in Islamic history as being this Caliph that reportedly, according to legend and some historians, and most khutbahs, when you go to the Friday prayer, this is something you're always going to hear about as a sense of the heyday of the Muslim Empire. There was a lady who was being accosted on the frontier of the Muslim Empire, somewhere maybe in Eastern Europe. She was being ridiculed. She was captured, I believe incarcerated. By one account or the other, what ends up happening is this lady, as she's being captured, accosted, or tortured, yells out in her hour of pain and fear, "Wa Mu'tasima, oh Mu'tasim, come back me up." She's invoking the name of the Caliph himself. So Mu'tasim somehow catches word of this all the way in eastern Iraq, or in Baghdad. He finds out and he dispatches, as the story goes, an army to go redeem that woman and bring her back. So he's well respected, although we don't know a lot more about what he did in his day-to-day or other accomplishments. We know two things about him in terms of highlights. The Wa Mu'tasima legend, whether it's true or not, I mean, it depends on the ammu that you ask. It could be anywhere between gospel or apocryphal. So let's leave it with the audience to figure out where they want to fall on that one. The other thing we know about Mu'tasim is he's the first one that formalized a slave special battalion to serve him and only him. Now, when I say slavery, I want people to really understand that because of the Islamic rules of the Sharia of Islamic law as it relates to bonding another human, it's not like slavery in the Western lexicon.
Yeah, and that's very important to this.
Very important. It's at best indentured servitude. The rules have it that any slave has to generally have the same quality of life as their master. They cannot be physically harmed. They cannot be physically coerced to do anything. And in fact, if they're forced into doing something that amounts to leadership, they must be first emancipated. And that creates this unique opportunity for the slave dynasty. And I'll get into that in a second. This is very different than what happened in the Congo or what happened in North America. That type of slavery where the masters are seeing their slaved people as mere chattel and property, that's unthinkable in the Sharia. There's no way you can do that. There are some rules that are broken when it comes to the Sharia. For example, if you look at the Quran and the Hadith, there is such a dissuasive tendency towards slavery. The way Islam, if you read the scriptures and you read the early authentic traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there was an intention to weed out and phase out slavery over time. So the rule was, okay, you can no longer just enslave any random freeborn and put him into the market as a slave. You can only do it to prisoners of war where there has been some sort of a war crime committed. There's a very prescribed methodology to how you could enslave somebody on the intake side. Now, I will say the Abbasis and the Ayyubids later didn't necessarily follow that aspect to a T, but I think they were gauging and hedging that the rules that pertain to their servitude is not like you're capturing somebody and putting him into a lifetime of slavery, because emancipation is actually seen as a act of religious worship for Muslims.
For
So
a
many
lot of
times,
things, right?
so many times in the Quran, absolutely, it'll say, if you mess up, if you break a holy sacred vow, you can free a slave.
Yeah.
If you miss a fast in Ramadan, you can free a slave. You accidentally kill somebody, you can free a number of slaves. Everything about the legal system is trying to emancipate them. So these people, the Abbasis, tried to find a creative workaround. But I want to illustrate later on, as I get into it, the Sharia still, by and large, informed and constrained what they could do with the slaves, that created this very powerful class of special armies that turned into the Mamluk dynasty. So Mu'tasim in the middle of the 8th century is what he is conscripting what he calls the ghilman. The ghilman comes from the word ghulam, which means young boy or slave, depending on the connotation. They're largely importing these children from the Central Asian region, the steppes. So modern Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, but these are Turkic people. They're Kipchaks. So they're Turkic. They get them at a later age, so maybe into their 20s and 25s. And this is something that the later Ayyubids realize is a mistake. So by the time the Caliph imports them, they're already humans that have their own values, that have their own opinions on things, and you can't wield them the same way that you can if somebody's younger. But why Mu'tasim wants to do it in the first place is because when you look at Baghdadian society or Iraqi society, by 850, the Abbasis have been around for 100 years. They have a very rich culture. They now have a lot of cultural baggage, socioeconomic strata, nobility has set in, and they are all creating unique risk factors for the Caliph. They're creating different factions and forces in society that he has to grapple with. So Mu'tasim goes, what if I can just import people that just love me because I'm good to them, and I train them and I show them a good life, and they just fight for me, and they have nothing to do with Baghdadian elite. They'll just be loyal to me. And for one generation, it works brilliantly. So you import these kids, they go to a barracks, essentially, and while we don't know what started when, what we know about the Mamluk society and their ethos is essentially you would end up in a barracks, depending on your ethnicity and where you came from. And by the way, the servitude of the Islamic Empire was not race really specific at all. We didn't have that many black Mamluks, for example. It was mostly Kipchaks, and we had Circassians that were coming from Eastern Europe. So it wasn't really race-based. It was more
I think that's an
strategic
important
reasons.
distinction.
Yeah, anybody. You basically had white people being enslaved. These are Turkic people, Eastern Europeans being enslaved that are whiter than the actual Abbasids themselves. It's not really race-based. It's more strategic. Where can I get the most loyal people that'll turn into great fighters and be good defenders of the realm? That's what they're looking for. It's not based on a racial ideology. So for Mu'tasim, it works out well. What you do is you end up importing these people. You train them into great soldiers. You train them in archery, cavalry, warfare, strategy, Islamic knowledge. So these guys all become very knowledgeable. They know the fiqh, they know the sharia. In most cases, they weren't actually born Muslim. And over time, what ends up happening is, according to Islamic law, you actually have to free somebody before you put them into the army in some sort of corporal or leadership capacity. So by the time they're 20, 25, they are now free. And depending on how they distinguish themselves in battle, they're starting to get other privileges. So it's actually an upgrade for a lot of these poor Turkic kids that are coming in to get around the no intake of a freeborn policy. They're actually incentivizing parents to put their kids into the pipeline, saying, listen, my kid is just a Kipchak here in southern Ukraine. I want this kid to be a bey in Baghdad or a Mamluk, because he could be
something.
He could be something serious. He could end up being a feudal lord. That's unthinkable in feudal Europe. There's no way you have any of that vertical social mobility whatsoever. And I'll get into why it was shocking to the Europeans, even at that time, what was happening in the Mamluk system. We good? Yep. So you get trained, and as you do better and better, you start to get certain privileges. And this starts to appear more and more in the Ayyubid period, because the Ayyubids try and figure out a synthesis to the trials of the earlier Abbasis. And to contextualize why the Ayyubids had to correct the Ghilman, Mamluki ideology and theory of the Abbasis, you have to understand what happened in the late 9th century. So in the late 860s, 870s, Mu'tasim institutes these policies. You've got this slave class coming in. They're all emancipated by the age of 25, 30. All his top-ranking officers in the barracks that he stations right outside Baghdad are elite troops, elite soldiers, and they are a force unto themselves. What ends up happening is, over time, he's got them stationed in a barracks in a city called Samarra. So Samarra actually is Arabic for it's a truncation of an Arabic phrase that comes from Sadra Manra. So the Arabs, the Abbasis, wanted to make this beautiful city that when you welcome these slaves that are coming in, and when they see this haven for slaves where they're getting this upgrade, Sadra Manra meant he who sees it is overjoyed. But over time, as these Mamluks ended up becoming a force to be reckoned with and a menace to society, the Abbasis and the people started calling it Sa'amanra. Sad is the one that sees it, Sa'amanra. So it was truncated over time and became Samarra. So Samarra is a specialized barracks town right close to Baghdad, where Mu'tasim actually moves from Baghdad because he wants to get away from the Baghdadi elite and go live with his slaves and people that are loyal to him, who by now, as they make it up the ranks, are actually free, but they're loyal to him because they're cut off from their family. They don't have any historical baggage. They don't come from a tribe in that area. So they're purely just socialized around the Caliph. So they're very loyal to him. But what ends up happening is, as his later generations are in Samarra, they end up becoming too powerful and they start bullying the Caliph. It's like we have these gerontological issues where you have elder abuse. That's basically what starts happening is these barracks members and attendees that are at the Samarra city start to bully the Caliph and start taking it over. So you have Al-Mutawakkil, who is 2 generations after Al-Mu'tasim, is for the first time surrounded and killed by the slaves, who then depose him for another Caliph. So you have, at this point, 4 straight Caliphs that are within 9 years deposed and killed because the slaves want somebody else, because they've just become so powerful. And the mistake historians point out that was made here is, when the Caliph moved his family in to Samarra, he cut himself off from the other counterbalances like the ulama and the other nobility and the other elites that could have actually been a bit of a check against the slaves becoming so powerful. So after the late 9th century...
Let me ask, in a way, does it, by him doing that, does that not somehow make him more of a target in general? Because now does he not play the role as a slave himself in that position? Like, even though he is a Caliph, but now that you're sitting with them, living with them, talking with them, you know, like now they're like, we're crew.
So historically, that's exactly what happened. It was a Pyrrhic victory because it worked for him. He was stationed with people that were loyal to him. The first cadre were very close to him, but it didn't work out for his kids and his grandkids the same way. It was actually a colossal mistake in hindsight.
Yeah.
So it was.
I would imagine
he won the battle, but he lost the war for his family. And why I'm saying this is because the Abbasis, after the late 9th century, 870, 880, after this mutiny and anarchy at Samarra, the Abbasid Khilafah was never the same ever again. It was permanently destabilized until the very end. And so the Abbasis, although they were destroyed by the Mongols in 1258, they actually were what we call pretenders until 1517. So you had a puppeteer or a puppet head Abbasi, that would be the nominal Caliph, all the way until 1517. So the later Mamluks would come and use the Caliph as the legitimator to their throne. And the reason for this was because there was an early hadith which is captured in the Kutub al-Sihah that are Sahih, where Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Prophet, peace be upon him, says, Al-A'immat min al-Quraysh. So he says that Al-A'imma min al-Quraysh, the imams, the leaders, are from the Quraysh. Early ulama understood that to mean political leadership. Later ulama, during especially the Ottoman era, then started to look at that differently and said the A'imma during that time, when you had a tribalistic society and a lot of infighting, it made sense for the Quraysh to have the automatic legitimacy to rule, but that's not meant to be eternal for all time. But for the longest period of time, the Abbasis had this monopoly where people thought only they could be the Caliph. So the Mamluks always called them their Caliph until 1517, even when the Abbasis no longer had a palace, they no longer had an army, they had no power, they continued to yield influence. And it's really shocking for people that think, well, the Abbasis were there from 750 until 1258. Only about 100, 125 years of those were they actually powerful and leading the way. After that, they became
So were the Mamluks leading it that whole time?
No. The Mamluks were 1250 until 1517.
No, but what I mean is, once they got their power and they started overthrowing the Caliphs, were they then at that point indirectly the Caliphs? Because the power,
no.
Or did they still?
They didn't have the audacity to do that yet.
Oh, I see.
They were simply trying to shuffle the actual leadership.
Okay.
So they're like, as long as you, the Abbasis, are doing our bidding, we'll keep you up there as the Caliph. But they destabilized everything. The Caliph no longer had any power. And then later Caliphs in the early 10th century found ways to counteract it, but it created such a imbalance that they never recovered from that. The Abbasis were never what they were in the 8th century.
And there was no attempt or plan to, I know this might be harsh, but to just say, you know what, this was a failed project, let's just kill them all?
No, because they're too powerful. It was like, who's going to kill them? You would send them to do that type of a thing.
And so there was no one left. So the normal army wouldn't be able to handle them.
No. This is the elite of the elite, and they're very well ingrained in society. They're very powerful. They control. If you understand the way the Mamluks work, later on this became very crystallized. But essentially, what happened over time with the Mamluks is you would come in, you would make it up the ranks, and then the first promotion you would get is you'd be emancipated, so you're free and you're a regular soldier in the army. The next promotion might be something where you get what's called an iqta. So the Sultan would say, this Mamluk has done such a great job that I'm going to give him his own land grant. The land still belongs to me, but he gets all the revenue from it, so he can start to become a feudal lord. And then he starts to raise his own little battalion. But he's doing so under a bigger, what they call amir, a hakim, or a amir is basically a noble, a lord.
Yeah.
And that lord, depending on his rank, would be a Amir al-Arba'in. So there's different stations. You'd have an Amir of 40 would be a junior mid-level partner, for example, if we use law firm terminology. The senior equity partner would be the Amir al-Mi'a. So he's actually the lord of 100 different Mamluks that have all their own land grants. So this is like a very pyramid structure. So the Amirs, you can see, are becoming very powerful.
Yeah.
So if you want to get rid of the Amirs and let's get rid of the Mamluks, the entire army is a cascade of these Amirs and their little sub-tentacles.
It's impossible.
Impossible. And then you have Amir Elf. These are the governors. So they're basically the lords of 1,000 Mamluks. So you can figure out the force multiplier of all the different Mamluks under them.
So, and let's just bring it back to the main point. So, again,
these slaves.
People are slaves, right? These people are slaves. They didn't end as slaves, but that was how they started. They all started as slaves. So, when you're hearing about slavery and Islam and you're hearing about these sort of things, you have to have a very different perspective. You cannot assume what happened here in America or Canada.
These are not Alabama, Mississippi slaves.
Yeah, exactly. This is not that. So I think it's very important.
These are slaves that have a legitimate chance to become the Sultan.
This is it.
Right.
This is the distinction we're trying to make.
And in fact, the weird thing is they are uniquely positioned to be Sultan because after one generation, the Mamluk, when they had emancipation and they married, their children were no longer considered Mamluks. They were called Awlad an-Nas. They were respected sons and daughters of the people, but they were never Mamluks anymore. So they weren't emirs. They were wealthy. They might have their own lands, but they weren't in this little papacy, this outstanding institution that is all the emirs that determine who the next sultan is. So imagine that conversation. Your dad was a Mamluk. He was Amir al-Alf.
Yeah.
He was one of the top dogs.
Yeah.
And you're like, I want to run for office. And all the emirs go, who do you think you are? A slave? You can't run for office here. Like, think about that for a second.
Yeah.
You're just a freeborn.
If you're not a
You're
slave,
just a freeborn.
you can't do anything.
Who are you? Yeah. It was
Only the slaves will get the power.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the Mamluk. So the Abbasids made the mistake of garrisoning everybody in the barracks, and they didn't keep them spread out in society. So it created this really a hornet's nest that you just couldn't mess with. So what the Ayyubids did when they came along in the 12th century, when things were still good under the great Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, and again, these people are reflecting Salahuddin's values, because you can imagine when Salahuddin as a slave, he's raising them as his own kids.
Yeah,
right. So these people are very loyal to Salahuddin. They get their emancipation very early. They got all kinds of land grants. So these Mamluks are the special force that are serving the Ayyubids. So you fast forward to the middle of the 13th century when the Ayyubids are getting weaker and weaker. Now we're about 75 years out from Salahuddin. In about 1249, Saleh al-Ayyubi, who was the great nephew of Salahuddin, falls ill and he dies just as King Louis IX and the Crusaders are invading Muslim lands. So it creates a panic. So Saleh al-Ayyubi, his wife, is a very interesting, impressive lady. Her name is Shajar ad-Dur. So Shajar doesn't tell anybody except the elite emirs, Amir Alfi, the elite Mamluks, that her husband has died, because she knows they have to defend the empire. And if the Crusaders know that the Sultan has died,
it's the season.
It's going to be hell to pay, if I can say that. So the Mamluks now,
you could say whatever you want. This is our show.
So the Mamluks are comprised at this time of none other than the great Bahri Mamluks. And when I say Bahri, they're named after the Bahr al-Nil in Egypt, because they're stationed right by the Nile River. So that's one of the barracks. Another garrison is a group of Mamluks that are coming from the Qala, from the tower, the Burj of Cairo. Those are called the Burji Mamluks, who are more Circassians from Eastern Europe. So the Turkic ones are right now in full-fledged authority. They're the ones calling all the shots. So Shajar ad-Dur calls Aybek, who's the leader, the biggest emir of the Mamluks at the time, and she says, can you help me defeat these Crusaders? And you cannot tell anybody that Saleh, your master, or your sultan has died. By this point, he's freed, so it's not really his master, but they still paid respect to them, and they were loyal to the sultan that had elevated them, because every step of the way, it's the sultan that's elevating you. So you have that loyalty, like, this man made me a knight. He made me a landowner. He made me the person in charge of Arba'in authority of 100. That was the whole point.
And that's
right?
the whole point of it.
It's loyalty that is
right.
bought with good favor,
yes.
which in turn is earned by you doing well and distinguishing yourself on the battlefield.
And let's not lie, those opportunities would never have come to you in any other way.
If you were not a slave coming through that process, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And your kids will not have that same opportunity.
Yeah.
It's very unique.
Again.
They're normal again.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre. But it's really a culmination and a brainchild of these unique factors that we're talking about. Islamic society in that time, I can't say we're not stratified now. We're just as racist and classist and all these things as anybody today. But in those days, remember, Salahuddin was actually a Kurd, people that are discriminated against today. Nobody cared back then. They're like, if you're a good man and you're a great king and you're religious, that's what we care about. You can be our leader. Same with the Mamluks. Nobody cared that they were former slaves. In fact, the society is now being engineered in a way as to reflect the idea that you can only be a leader if you were previously a slave.
Yeah.
So it just tells you a lot about the society. So there's this confluence of societal views on these people, the Sharia forcing the masters to not be able to squeeze too much out of them and have to promote them such that they become very powerful, and the circumstances coming in. You've got a sultan who is dead. He doesn't have any heir apparent, so creates this crisis at the most inopportune, horrendous time. So Shajar ad-Dur taps Aybek and the Bahri Mamluks, which include Aybek at the helm. You have Saifuddin Qutuz, and you have the great Ruknuddin Baybars, the architect of all the battle plans.
And if you're wondering who these guys are, if I may, if you're wondering who these guys are, we have a video on our channel. Make sure you go check it out, where we talk about the top 10 Muslim generals of all time, and two of these guys. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but maybe I spoiled it. But two of these guys.
Suffice to say, Baybars is one of the greatest generals. Definitely, the Muslim world has seen. I think one of the greatest generals the world has seen. He is a brilliant savant, and he shows it in every one of these battles. So Shajar ad-Dur, the queen, who nobody knows her husband has died, takes these three Mamluk triumvirs, and they go and they defeat the Crusaders in successive battles at Mansoura in 1250, and then in, I believe it's called Fariskur, where King Louis is actually captured.
Yeah.
And when King Louis is captured, that's when it gets out somehow that it's actually these Mamluks that are running the country with Shajar ad-Dur, and that Saleh al-Ayyubi has actually died.
Well, that's
it sends tremors through the entire world. Europeans are like, who is running the Muslim world? And they destroyed us, and they have the French king being captured. What is going on? We're negotiating with slaves. They could not fathom. They were shocked. They were offended.
Yeah.
You sent a bunch of slaves to fight us, and they kick our
They're
butt.
really a class system over there.
Yeah.
Over there, it's no joke.
You're born in the same class that you die in.
Yeah, forever.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And you don't even look at a feudal lord a certain way. He has the right to walk over you and spit on you. They are very class-based. And your favorite movie that we talked about earlier, Kingdom of Heaven, reflects that. When Guy de Lusignan says, this would never inherit in France. Me sitting at a commoner's table, or a commoner sitting at my table. This is bad.
Absolutely.
This is immoral.
Yeah, immoral.
Their moral framework actually created and endorsed the strata.
Yeah, what a contrast to what the Muslims were doing at the time.
But still, at this point, this is where it gets really interesting. Shajar ad-Dur still has no intention of creating the Mamluks as a sultanate. She's still thinking of them as this special class of warriors that helped her save the realm. But what ends up happening is, this is still 13th century Arabia, or the Muslim world, and everybody starts to clamor and wonder how you can have a sultana at the helm of the great Muslim empire.
Right. More controversies.
So who else gives a comment other than Al-Khalif al-Abbasi, the Abbasid Caliph by the name of Al-Musta'sim Billah Al-Akhir? The final Caliph that gets destroyed by the Mongols has quite a few views about the idea of a woman running the empire, and he does not endorse her. And for those who understand what the symbolic support of the Abbasis means, and that being taken away, suffice to say, it's catastrophic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no
so
chance.
Not having the support of the Caliph, and Musta'sim makes a really funny comment where he goes, if you don't have any men that can lead your empire, let us know. We'll send you some.
Straight up.
So when you put it that way, even the Ayyubids and the Mamluks are like, okay, we got to do something here. So they marry Aybek to Shajar ad-Dur. So they're like, okay, the Mamluks are in power. They are the defenders of the realm.
So by marriage. That's what happened.
By marriage. But over time, Aybek is now acting like the Sultan. And Shajar ad-Dur is like, wait, but I'm supposed to be the Sultan. I just married you to give me cover.
Yeah.
And then she starts to suspect that he's going to go marry another Ayyubid princess, a younger one, and sideline her. So she plots. And this is where it gets really Game of Thrones. And this is where I want to make it clear. I know we are serenading this Mamlukian empire and the system they have in a very positive light. But these people are not companions of the Prophet. These are not apostles of Jesus. These people do not walk on water. They are politicians. They are nobility people that are vying for power, just like everybody else in this dirty world that we live in. So I'm not trying to say that these are unique people, but I'm trying to focus on the system that was created by this confluence of factors and what it tells you about the society and about medieval Islamic civilization. So what ends up happening is she has him assassinated when he's in the pool with some handmaiden or something. But the Bahari Mamluks, Qutuz and Baybars, are like, over our dead body, no freaking way are you going to kill our guy. And they have her killed. I think they hire some handmaidens to go apparently beat her to death with a broomstick.
Is that
It gets ugly. It's Game of Thrones ugly.
Oh,
There's just a one haymaker after the other. So Shajaradur is knocked off, and her son, who is Saleh al-Ayyubi's heir apparent, but he's very young, the best he can do is be ruled by a regent or a steward. He's just too young. So Qutuz comes in and goes, I'm ruling in his name. And then a few months or maybe a year later, he's like, I'm ruling in my name. This is the Mamluk dynasty. Qutuz takes over, and he rules from 1259 to 1260. In that time, the reason why this man gets all his flowers is...
Where are they, if you don't mind? Like Jewish. They're in Egypt.
This is Cairo, bro.
Cairo. This is all Cairo now.
So Baybars is probably the architect of Shajaradur being killed because he's a very impulsive guy. When you think about Baybars, we don't have much of a sample size on what he did as a king because he only lasted 1 year. What we do know about him is that he's very rash. He's very quick with the trigger, but this man fears nothing. And if he is confronted with adversity, he goes and attacks it head on. So for that period of time, the year of 1259, 1260, there's no better person to be in that situation for the Ummah than Qutuz. What does Qutuz do? He takes over. He actually, to his credit, doesn't kill the young boy. He just sidelines him. A lot like Salahuddin. Mm-hmm. I think maybe he's taking a page out of Salahuddin's playbook when Salahuddin took over from the Zengid prince Ismail and didn't kill him. He actually sent him back to his family. It was a very un-Ottoman transfer of power, if I might say that.
Yeah, sure.
And very un-Mamlukian too.
Yeah. This
is not at all to be seen as indicative of how things would go later on. It was a bloodbath every time there was a turnover of administration. But we'll stick with Qutuz for now. Qutuz in 1260 is in Cairo right after what has happened in the other parts of the Muslim world. The Abbasis have been decimated in Baghdad in 1258. And so when Hulagu Khan comes west, he goes, okay, now that I've destroyed the Abbasis, what other Muslims can I find in this world? Oh, Cairo. Those Ayyubids are the crown jewel of the empire, or the vanguards. They're the last one that if I wipe them out, no more Islam. We got them. So sitting in Mesopotamia, or sitting up there in northern Sham, the Levant area on the border with Levant and Mesopotamia and Iraq, he sends an emissary all the way to Qutuz in Cairo, essentially saying that just let us know when you want to turn the keys over and we'll decide what to do with you.
Yeah.
And Qutuz doesn't do the Islamic thing according to the Sharia and the fiqh. He does the Qutuz thing, which is he kills all those emissaries and he hangs them outside the city gates.
Oh, really?
Send a message. And if you know anything about the Mongols, that's not what they like you to do. That is not the move. But this goes to show you Qutuz fears nothing.
But that was their move, was it not? The Mongols were, as you said previously, these guys were.
But in history,
the emissaries were always given their respect, right?
I mean, I don't know that the Mongols. I'm not the biggest fan of the Mongols, so maybe I'm kind of biased. I don't know them to be particularly gentlemanly and purveyors of the morality of war.
Right.
But that was a line you don't cross with them. In fact, the reason why they invaded the Khwarezm Empire is because the Khwarezm Shah made the stupid move of killing their emissary when, at that time, Genghis Khan was being more peaceable. But by the time you get to Hulagu, he's got a legacy of bloodbathing. So he's like, I'm just going to let you know that I'm going to be killing you. If you turn yourself over, maybe I won't kill all of you. It's like a bit of a Thanos proposition.
Yeah.
But Qutuz goes the other way. Qutuz is like, oh, okay. He kills them all. Not only that, but because this man is so fearless, he starts assembling an army and he marches immediately into the Bilad al-Sham. So he goes into Palestine, okay? And he takes his trusted lord, who he offers high governorship in Baybars, to come with him. And Baybars by this time has distinguished himself at Mansoura and Firashkur and all these battles as a military genius. This man is a savant. When you're going to war, you might be the rallying cry and the Sultan, and believe me, Qutuz was all those things. But none of that matters if you don't have a genius tactician like Baybars on your side. So they go and they camp out somewhere in historic Palestine in the valley of Ain Jalut. And I'm going to have a special episode at some point, you and me, on Ain Jalut and how we talked a bit about this in the top 10 generals, the sheer importance of this battle and the utter brilliance of Baybars and bringing it home. Long story short, he understands his enemy is very aggressive, like a bunch of giant Asian hornets. So he knows that their strength is to always attack fearlessly. What he also knows is their strength is their cavalry. In fact, they're almost all cavalry heavy. They don't even have many infantry. They're very lopsided in terms of their military composition, but they've never really lost before, so it doesn't really matter. But he knows that if there is a weakness, if there is a little kink in the armor, that's going to be the one that it's their cavalry heavy. So what he does is he devises a scheme where he positions different battalions throughout the mountainside alongside a valley that goes pretty deep and is pretty narrow, the Ain Jalut Valley. And Ain Jalut is actually Arabic for the Eye of Goliath, because it is believed that Goliath, in his battles against Nabi Dawood alayhi salam, King David, and King Saul, was in this area. Oh, now we also understand that was an Elah Valley, which may have been a different valley. There's some controversy over whether it actually happened there, but historically they called this Ain Jalut because it is a valley that something of historic significance occurred at. What Baber is able to do is he goads them into following some of his men down the hill. So if you're on horseback and you're coming down a hill, that's not really a good situation, because you're charging at people out of anger because they just punched you in the face and started running. So these Mongols are chasing him down the hill. And then every time they turn a corner, he's got some battalions encircling people and ambushing them. And just as they collect themselves, they start running down the hill. And the Mongols chase after them even more upset. They keep doing that numerous times until they end up in a valley where all of a sudden they're now surrounded by the Mamluks. It is just brilliant. But even then, I'm going to give these guys their flowers. The Mongolians still almost win that battle. At one point, Qutuz, it's well documented in a couple of movies if you watch about him. At one point, the battle's not looking good. These Mongols just don't go down. And at this point, they're undefeated, so they're not even fathoming the prospect of a loss. So they're like, well, that's the weakest point of the encirclement. Let's break through it. Qutuz sees this. He rips off his helmet. He throws it into the crowd so people can see him. He's like, I am your sultan. Let's go defend Islam. That's what he says. He goes, Wa Islama. And he rushes headfirst into the battle. And he's able to beat back that counterattack that was going to break through. Because if they had broken through, then their cavalry, it just becomes messy.
Yeah, it's
right. Yeah. So it was a perfect storm. And by the way, the reason why the Mongols didn't have more people is purely a stroke of divine providence. They only had 25,000 people here. The Mamluks only had 22,000 because Hulagu, after decimating Baghdad, the great Khan back home, Ogdai, had died. A civil war broke out, including some Mongols that had become Muslim that were really upset at what had happened in Baghdad, Berke Khan. So they had a whole civil war that left the Western front pretty thin. So it's almost like God raised the bar just low enough for the Mamluks to be able to cross over and survive on the other side. But this is still a Mongol army, and they don't lose. They just never lose. They lost that day. The world is shocked. They cannot believe that somebody finally stopped them, much less the slave army of Europe, of the Middle East. Qutuz is hailed as the hero. The sad reality, though, is Qutuz, in his rashness, according to most reliable accounts, is not afraid of anything. And so the first thing he does the next day, Baybars goes to him, okay, bro, so where's my governorship? It's my time. And historically, the Mamluks always do this, where you serve at the pleasure of the Sultan. So when he gives you an iqta, a land grant, or he makes you Amir Arba'in or Amir Miya, if he thinks you're getting too powerful, he might shuffle things around just to disenfranchise you so he can give power to somebody else. So in his head, Khotos is thinking, this man is the hero. I need to sideline him because remember the psyche. I actually should have touched upon this earlier. Remember the psyche of a Mamluk. You've come in, you don't have parental figures. Your only loyalty is to yourself rising up the ranks and maybe your sultan or your emir that patronize you. Other than that, you're trying to get what's best for you and you believe in saving the realm. So you just want to be the Mamluk sultan because you've got your visions for how you want to save the ummah. Baybars has his view. Khotos has his view. And suffice to say, they're competing on this day. Khotos doesn't want him to be a governor because this man's the hero. He's too good. He's too good. If I give this man an inch, he's going to take 10 yards, and there's no loyalty. And again, I wasn't his emir.
Yeah,
I was
he owes you nothing.
Yeah, he owes me nothing. So he tries sidelining him, but he realized he's too powerful to kill because the other emirs love him.
He won the war.
Yeah,
he already won.
And you still have Mongolians and you still have Crusaders. You actually need this dude.
Yeah.
Right? Again, Khotos is a very brave man. He's a great warrior, but the genius that is the quarterback of the victory is Baybars. So he tries sidelining him. He goes, no, I'm not going to make you a governor. Now, if he was Salahuddin or if he was a bit more strategic, yalla, inshallah, yeah, let's get home to Cairo and we'll talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But he tells him to his face, like, no, you're not going to be a governor. Just go sit there and shut up, essentially. So the next day, on the way back to Cairo, as this victorious champion who has saved the Muslim world, there is an unfortunate hunting accident in the woods where Khotos is killed.
Wow.
The very same or next day, all the other emirs acclaim Baybars as the sultan. Even the ulama are all lined up and they go, yep, Baybars is our guy. He's the sultan. There's a lot of ammus that do not want to believe that the great Baybars, one of my heroes, had anything to do with that. Comes back to humanizing heroes. I'm not afraid to say that he had every incentive to do what he did. And I'm also not afraid to say that the facts just don't line up with any alternative story. Why did everybody just acclaim him to be the sultan the next day as though nothing happened?
Yeah, right.
It's just, who benefited from that? How come if somebody else killed him, they didn't try and ascend? It's, to me, pretty insulting of people's intelligence to think anybody for what Baybars did it. And again, these are not Sahabis. And in Qutuz's and Baybars' mind, this is all the statecraft and the Game of Thrones that they signed up to play.
Yeah.
This is not, even the ulama at the time, this is not anything that they would say is on the immorality level of killing civilians. Ulama always understood they had different branches of fiqh. Fiqh al-Bughat, fiqh al-Qital al-Siyasi. These are political murders, political assassinations that didn't spill over into the general population. And so the ulama looked the other way. So they said, okay, well, you guys got into a battle, you won, and we're going to grill you. And this was the Mamluk coronation process, was typically started by this process of Baybars. You would go, get the other emirs would nominate you, all the emirs of Alf, the 1,000 ones, maybe the 100 ones, but the 40 guys were the mid-market guys, the middle management. So it was always the elite emirs, or the atabaks, as they would call them. They would proclaim you. Then you would go the next day and you would get the ulama. You'd go to Dar al-Qada. And the ulama and the muftis would grill you. It was like a Senate commission where they would say, okay, what's your religiosity level? Tell us about this. Tell us about this fiqh. Tell us about that. How much of a Muslim are you? What are you made of? And depending on if he could sell them, they would endorse him the next day or the next Jummah at the khutbah and say, may God be pleased with the ruler Baybars, we endorse him. So that's the process you go through. And then you have to go get the puppeteer or the puppet head from the Abbasis
to sign you off.
To sign off. So Baybars actually goes and he's like, I'm the sultan, but I need the backing of somebody who has a religious authority other than the ulama. So he pulls in some Abbasi prince that happened to not be in Baghdad at the time that the Mongols were doing their thing. He goes, you're the Caliph. Can you endorse me to be the sultan? Guy's like, absolutely. Where do I sign? He's just a puppet.
Wow.
And Baybars now has the legitimacy to rule. And he starts this dynasty and this coronation ratification process that the Mamluks by and large follow for the next 267 years from his reign, 1260 to 1277, all the way to 1517 when Salim al-Awwal, Salim the Resolute, the Ottoman Sultan, defeats them and takes over the Hijaz. So they have a great run of defending the realm from Crusaders, from Mongols. Baybars himself defeats the Crusaders numerous times and sets back the Mongolians many times. So this man is that dude that finally arrives that turns the tide. And for some reason, he doesn't get enough love in history. But he is that man that turned the tide of the 13th century and held down the fort until the Ottomans came in 1299. I know you've had a lot of questions around this.
Yeah, so at that time, I do. And I think we all do, right? We all do. I think it's important to highlight here that the Abbasids still remained the Caliph in Iraq. Like they still had that.
They were what we call pretenders.
Yes.
They were just being propped up by the Mamluks because the Mamluks...
But the Mamluks were running the whole...
They were the kings. They were the actual caliphs.
Of more than just Egypt, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
All of the Middle East. The heartland of the Islamic Empire.
So if they had a problem, let's say in Syria, they would be the ones to... Like, it would be their... Their court would be the one to deal with it.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. So they were just a stamp, basically.
And that was even beyond 1258. They had been puppets for a long time because they really, since the middle of the 9th century, as we talked about, didn't have a whole lot of sway anymore. They had symbolic power. They had soft power. For example, Al-Mustasim Billah making that comment about Shajar al-Dur.
Yeah, right.
Like, if you want more males, I'll send you some.
Yeah.
He had that paternalistic patriarchy, but it wasn't actual hard power.
And that was basically all based on that hadith that they had. That's how it was interpreted at the time, that they had to be that. So, okay, we'll keep you guys there, but you do nothing. Just endorse us.
Exactly.
That's basically the idea.
That's it. And Baybars came up, again, the brilliant strategist and the genius that he was like, I got the ulama, but you know what? Let me just get a Caliph to back me up.
Yeah. And these guys throw him some love, and that's it. It was easy sell.
But in 1277, when Baybars dies, it's not his son that takes over. It's the next of the Amir Qadra, because his kids aren't slaves.
Free.
You're not qualified to rule. You weren't a Mamluk.
You're
awlad al-nas. There's actually a dynasty that tries to form. There's a Mamluk by the name of Qalawuni who tries appointing his son, but it doesn't last very long. What ends up happening is certain groups of people, the Bahri Mamluks, rule until early 1400s. And then later on, the Burji Mamluks from your Qala, the Circassians, start taking over. And then they become all the emirs and they start appointing their own people. And they rule until 1517.
Oh, I see. So then it became a certain sect of the Mamluks that took it.
Exactly.
And they didn't give it back. It wasn't a free-for-all anymore.
It wasn't a free-for-all. So ethnically, they might look different. They're now the Circassians that are ruling versus the Turkic Kipchaks that were ruling before.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the history of the Mamluks, how they saved the realm despite being slaves.
If you're like me, then you're obviously starstruck at this moment.
Pretty incredible story that history doesn't have too many of.
Yeah. So this is a dynasty of slaves. These are slaves that ruled. And if you're a kid, if you were the son or daughter of a slave, you weren't allowed to rule because you were automatically freed. So I think that's a very important distinction to make. So I think that was incredible. I think everyone benefited from that today, Mujir. Thank you. Well, it's our show, so I don't know if I need to thank you or not. But it was incredible.
Is that it though? No questions? It just all made sense?
A lot of questions. Lot just happened here. Like, we basically discovered, because I think everyone is kind of on the same vibe here, that you had a Muslim ruler that was from a generation of slaves, where if you weren't a direct slave, you had no chance in having, not let alone land. You couldn't rule. You had nothing, no chance. So it was a time, arguably, that if you were a slave, you had a shot. Whereas
the only shot you had was if you were a slave.
Yeah, the only shot was being a slave. Right? Yeah.
Well, no, look, to be fair, the Awlad al-Nas did become very prominent, but they became civilian society. The power brokering elite is entirely the Mamluk papacy, as I'm going to call it.
So from the time of Salah ad-Din, right? Right, like his.
No. But remember, Salahuddin used them as a special.
No.
As a special
No,
army.
I know, but what I'm trying to understand in the timeline, because they were defending the Crusaders from that side, right? From the Jerusalem side, Egypt side, right?
Yeah.
So the minute they were created, was it always in Egypt, or did they start in Iraq? Because so like when did they move? What's that move?
No, so remember, they started in concept because they're not hereditary. Remember, the whole concept that we're talking about here is it's actually a slave creating institution that emancipates them and creates these super soldiers.
That's right.
That ideation began with Mu'tasim in the 9th century.
That's correct.
Or he really brought it to the fore.
But what I'm saying, what I'm asking is, because so during Mu'tasim's time, they were in Iraq,
in Samarra, and they were
in Samarra.
finalized.
Exactly right.
What the Ayyubids did when they look back and they understood that, hey, the Abbasids really messed this one up. We love the idea of creating a parallel elite class that is only loyal to us without the downfalls and the instability of the Abbasids. How do you strike that balance? They started to spread them out throughout society and better integrated them. The Awlad al-Nas would go back to being Cairo elites. The Awlad al-Nas of the Baharis or the Burjis, they all just lived in their society and went off their merry life.
But so why did they put them back in Egypt? Is there a reason?
No, okay. So I understand what you're saying. When the Abbasids are doing it in Iraq, the Ayyubids, their power base is Egypt. Salahuddin,
oh, right.
He goes back to Cairo, and his sons and his descendants rule from Cairo.
Oh, I see.
So they want their elite forces to be with them.
That's what it is.
So that's how they come to Muslim. That's how they come to
Egypt. I see. So the whole thing goes to Egypt then. The whole leadership of Islam, quote unquote, the Muslim leadership.
And that's the connection between the Mamluks starting in Iraq and how they got from Ukraine and the steppe to to Egypt.
Oh, I see. So that's what ends up happening. Okay. And at that time they were still recruiting from these areas, Caucasia and Ukraine.
Yeah, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah,
it works so well.
So the recruitment process was good. It's just how we integrate it became the problem.
So the Abbasids, it wasn't good.
Yeah.
The Abbasids, they created this monster that just destabilized them.
Yeah, the whole thing.
So generation 5, 6 after Al-Mutawakkil, even if the Caliph doesn't want to recruit from the Kipchaks, it doesn't matter because the Emirs now are just automatically importing.
Oh, yeah, they're just taking them now.
They're just a machine by the book. That's the whole point.
It's a whole separate system. They're coming in no matter what.
Exactly. So Salahuddin is looking at that model and he's thinking, we can make this work. Let's do it in Egypt a smarter way.
I gotcha.
That's the idea.
I gotcha. Now let me ask you this. So one thing that you said that was really important, I think a lot of people pointed out to that, is that the rulers had to basically give their thumbs up on it, right? The religious rulers, the ulama, the scholars.
Yeah.
Right? They had to basically sign up and say, yeah, he's good. Do you have any insight into how rigorous, like, was it kind of like, because we're making it a human thing, right? Was there a little bit, man, if we don't endorse this guy, we're dead? Or was it like, no, if this guy actually is a religious and incompetent religious person, he doesn't pray, he's a loser, he's not going anywhere, we're actually going to stop it? What's the story there?
Absolutely. So Dr. Noah Feldman at Harvard Law actually wrote a phenomenal book on this, The Fall and Rise of the Islamic Empire. In it, he really does a great job explaining how the mistake that, I'm putting my own spin on it too. What essentially he says is you definitely had this counterbalancing of different organs. The challenge Westerners have trying to understand the role the ulama played is that they didn't actually form a part of the state itself. When you look at a modern Western state, whether it's the United States of America, whether it's Canada, the judiciary is a counteracting force, but it's absolutely got a actual position in the state apparatus.
Right.
So you give significance, when you're looking at it from a Western standpoint, you tend to only give significance to things that seem to belong to the actual functional apparatus of state. The ulama were a class unto themselves that operated outside.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they were able to be a force to be reckoned with is because the general population is very devout. So they're judging the ruler in terms of how well he implements Islamic law and whether he follows it himself. So even if you're a heathenistic idiot, you can't show it because the people will not tolerate, and the ulama will not tolerate a poor, impious ruler. Most of the time, they don't know what the ruler is doing. They don't know whether what he's doing is halal or haram. They're looking to the ulama. So the ulama are saying, I don't like what Baybars did there. I don't like what this guy did there. And when they yank the legitimacy out from under like a carpet from the sultan, now the sultan is among the long knives. He's looking around. He's like, oh, there's other people that the ulama are probably backing that can replace me.
Oh,
right. So there could be regime change because...
So now it opens the door for a coup d'etat. Now it's open. Now anything can happen.
So as they say in basketball, the more important aspect of shot blocking is the shots that you alter before they're even taken.
Right.
It's the idea that it creates this mental check and balance on the sultan that if I transgress on Islamic law, the ulama are not going to stand for it and the people will want me dead.
And once the people want you dead, they're just waiting for you to die.
Exactly.
There's no going back from that.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure. Amazing.
So it's this amazing check and balance, and we have to give a lot of credit to the early founders of Islamic civilization. We're going to have a specially dedicated episode on this, particularly the Mihna, which is the Abbasi Inquisition of the late 8th century, early 9th century, right before Mu'tasim. This is a very transformative time for the worse for the Abbasis. They start to really muscle up the ulama. They start locking them up. They start trying to get them to come along with their theological agenda. And for the most part, a lot of the ulama are coming along because they're not used to pushing back against a Caliph that has an army. They get tossed in jail. Hey, I just need you to say that the Quran is a creation. Okay, I guess it is created by God. There's only one stalwart, rahimahullah, legend of legends, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, that will not go for it. And he essentially strikes up a one-man holdout against the great Abbasi Khilafah. They try torturing him. They try jailing him in the hopes that he'll say the Quran is a creation. Because what the Abbasis are starting to do is shape the theological agenda and value framework of the population in a manner that underpins their legitimacy to rule. So, for example, if I can say the Quran is created, well, then maybe it can be modified over time to suit the agenda. Next thing you know, there's going to be a Surat al-Abbasiyun. It's created. Right. We're adding to the creation. Creations are always going to evolve. Imam Ahmad's like,
he saw that.
See what you're doing? We're not doing that. The Quran is eternal. It's always been what it is now. It was the word of God written many, many eternities ago. It's not a creation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is the eternal word of God.
Yeah.
And once Pete stood on his head like that, to use hockey terminology, it created a revolution of sorts where the people started looking to the imams and the ulamas and being like, yeah, you know what? I actually want to hear what the imam has to say. I don't care. The Caliph has his own agenda. Is he following Islamic law? He thinks he is. I don't know. What does Imam Ahmad say? What does Imam Hassan al-Basri say? What does Imam Ghazali say? When those ulama are the arbiters of whether the executive is actually doing his job, which is in an Islamic society to implement Islamic law, and when they judge negatively in that regard, he's not my Caliph anymore. So he created this amazing check and balance that created these good dynastic outcomes. I'm not saying they were perfect, but in many ways, that's why the Abbasids were so weak for so long, but the Khilafah, the empire, just hummed along like nothing happened because they had this series of checks and balances. They didn't need the Sultan to be an autocrat, and in fact, he wasn't an autocrat. There were so many checks and balances on him. So when Western historians and politicians, political scientists are looking at Islamic history, they're thinking, oh, you guys only have a history of despotism. You only have absolute monarchy. That is absolutely not the case. You actually had one of the first instances of a judicial organ, in our case, outside the state, checking the excesses of the executive. It created better outcomes, why you didn't have as much tyranny, although you certainly did. There are certainly things within the lines that the executive can always do, but it was much better than a lot of other medieval societies. And it created the output that was the golden age of Islam. Proof is in the pudding.
And that's all the time we have for you guys today. I want to thank you for your time. It was a great show. We learned a lot today. Mujir, mashallah, slave empire.
Unreal. What a story.
Unreal. So please like, please subscribe, please comment. If we said something that made you upset, let us know. If we said something that you loved, also, please let us know. Like and share and subscribe. And we will see you again next week on the Saints of Time podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in.